agenda is that we have 3 of our fellow retirees that are going to come up and be in the hot seat up here, I guess. Sid, Les, and Mike Fisher. If you'd like to come up. I think you guys are
I'll feel better.
Gene Sir was the originator of this whole evening of the retreat, and so it was going to be Gene's job to control these guys, and that's now fallen to me, and I'm totally out of my depth. Gene, of course, couldn't be here. He for health reasons, couldn't come, and we're sorry we're going to miss him, but thanks to Bob Chapman, who's out there somewhere. Bob, all right. Bob spent some time with Gene with a video camera and videoed a really nice presentation, which he sent me, and I just kind of spiffied it up.
Well, I was recruited by none other than Fred Merrifield, I think with some urging by Russell Culp. I started in 1963, and retired in 96, so I was full-time employee for 33 years, and then quite a number of years thereafter part-time when I was teaching the project management course that I had worked so hard on putting that book together that we, I think, still use. Mm-hmm. I had come to CH2 with a fresh master's degree in sanitary engineering, as it was called then, from Harvard. I was pretty sure that I was a, pretty learned engineer, and had worked several years with the Kansas Department of Ecology. But the first job that I was assigned was a septic tank for the Corvallis Country Club. Having successfully completed that one, they launched me into a much more complicated job with Dick Humphrey. I was assigned to go down to Cave Junction and try to put together a waste stabilization pond for them. So that was my first job. Certainly the most enjoyable one, I think, would be the Tahoe tertiary treatment plant. It was our early breakthrough into what later became really an entree to the big time for the firm. Well, I think undoubtedly that was Sid Laswell. Sid just had a wonderful way of talking you in to do stuff that you didn't really want to do, which in our case meant uprooting the family and moving all over the world, it seemed like. So he was my mentor during my whole career with CH2M. One that sticks in my memory still is the Alexandria, Egypt project, when a few of the folks from the then 70s discipline went over and tried mightily to get some sort of wastewater system up and going for the folks in Alexandria, and in the end we were able to succeed. But learning the culture of the Arab world and how different it was from the way we tended to operate, it was really quite memorable. The discipline system that we had in those days was a tremendous asset to the firm. It certainly gave an opportunity to foster the idea that you really didn't have to be a manager to be quite successful in our firm. Jim Howland used to put it, it was like a three-legged milk stool, and you had to have all three legs, and technology and project management were two of those legs. So, and I think it's what enabled the firm to grow beyond being just a regional powerhouse firm into a national and now an international firm. And, I did serve on the firm's board of directors for 15 years, and it was really interesting to see how we grew during those years. Most of my retirement activities have been kind of close to home, and one of them really has been a great source of enjoyment to me, and that's working on what we term the alumni history. I hope all of you that are here tonight have had an opportunity to look it up on the web. It's really full of tremendously interesting things, and we've had a lot of response from people who are retired and some long gone now. And it starts at the beginning of the firm and carries through with all the activities of the firm through, about 2007 or 8. And we hope it'll be a continuing thing, and I still enjoy working on it. I hope you guys have a great time at the reunion, and I sure wish I could be there with you, but health just doesn't permit it. Maybe next time.
How did you get to CH2M HILL, or Cornell, in your case, Cornell, Howland, Hayes, and Merrifield? And I'd like to hear the story from each of you guys on that one. So.
Well, I don't think, do I need this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's on. It's on.
okay. I started at Oregon State in 1941. You all remember 1941. I was just out of high school, obviously, and just 17 years old. And I got my freshman year in. Then the war started, as you remember. Spent 3 years in the Pacific. You didn't have that 1 year and you're out deal in those days. And came back to school. I was married. I married before I went into the Army. Came back to school, finished my 3 years, and had classes from Fred Merrifield, of course. Couldn't avoid that if you were in the Sanitary Corps. Fred was a pilot in World War I, and I never knew which side he was on. But nevertheless, Fred was my major professor. And Fred interviewed me and hired me in August of '49, just after I graduated, to go with CH2M HILL as employee number 11. There were the 6 partners. There was Earl Reynolds. There was Bob Adams, who was working part-time. I think there was a Niels Nordquist there, a draftsman, and an electrical engineer. I forget his name now. And I was employee number 11. Bob Adams, I think, is the oldest living, or almost living, employee. Bob's about 4 months older than I am. And I'm like about my age, but I'm up there. So Fred hired me. I went to work for $265 a month. My first job was in Bingen, Washington, as an inspector on a water installation, a water system installation. Bingen, Washington is right across from the Dalles, the big city. That was in 1949, summer of '49. And I went on, the next year I was in Forest Grove, at a treatment plant as a project inspection type person, studying for my engineering exam, and lived there in a one-room apartment and commuted back and forth to Corvallis. And that was the first design build we did. You don't know we did that.
Yeah.
And that was a big project. All the projects were big in those days. You know, this was maybe a $150,000 project, primary treatment plant and a pond. And the city didn't have enough money. The contractor was a union contractor, and they had to cut costs. So they said, Mr. Lasswell, could you do the mechanical work? Hell yes, I can do it. I says, so they said, well, here's a purchase order pad. You ordered the equipment, and I said, well, when are we going to work? He said, well, you got to work after the contractor leaves because he's a union man. So you got to work after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So an old fire chief and I ordered all the equipment, and all the piping and all the stuff, and we installed that stuff at 4 o'clock, ongoing into the night on this little treatment plant. That was kind of a fun job. And so that was my early career with CH2M HILL. The offices then were downtown, right over the J.C. Penney building. You walk up stairway, leaky roof, no air conditioning or anything. So being out in the field was a good deal because it was too hot or too wet because it leaked like a sieve. And had to get waterproof paper for the plants. So that's how I started.
Good. Well,
oh, by the way, after I got my engineering license, I got a $10 raise. That's the value of engineering, apparently.
That's more than you gave me on my first raise.
Said you should have waited a few years later, it would have been $25.
That's right. It's true.
I graduated in '58 from Oregon State. I did not know that CH2M, Cornell, Howland, Hayes, Merrifield, was in the city. I applied in San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. Couldn't find a job. Took a job for $525 a month with Mercer Steel in Portland. And in April of '58, Myrna moved back to Portland to give birth to our youngest child. I stayed in Corvallis. Fred Merrifield asked me to go see Jim Holland and gave me the address. And I went over to see Jim, and we spent 2 hours talking. And I introduced Mr. Howland, but he soon became Jim, and gave me a tour of the office. The next day, I had an offer letter from Jim Howland. I still have the letter. And they offered me $425. And I really wanted to go to work for them. And I called Myrna, and she said yes. So I accepted the job. I became the junior structural engineer in Bob Adams' Holly Cornell Structural Group. And Harry Meidel, who was 2 years before me, scared the hell out of me because he knew more about structures than I knew I could ever learn. And can I go into my first job? There?
yeah, go ahead.
First job was I got rescued, went to work in June. In August, they guaranteed I wouldn't move for a year. But in August, they called me in the office and Sid offered me a resident job in Cannon Beach, Oregon. And in September, Myrna moved down to Cannon Beach, and I was a resident engineer at Cannon Beach. And in Cannon Beach, job number 1458R, 1459R, we got $125 living allowance. The only thing that saved us, we were so broke. And I learned really from there, fondness for this guy, He taught me how to work with a client, to do things, and came down only about every month or two. But I was on my own, and he could just get a hold of me by telephone or mail, which was kind of nice too, Sid. We completed the job on time and on budget. Moved back to Corvallis and was rescued from the structural group. Stayed in sanitary ever since, until Gene Sir, John Filbert, with their secondary activated sludge, kicked out the trickling filter guys.
Well, it's amazing to me what a few years and a little bit of inflation does to wages.
Well, you were in a different division too.
Yeah, right. I went through the Fred Merrifield gauntlet like lots of people in this room did, and Jim as well. But at the end of the day, I was hired by Jim, but it obviously had Fred's approval beforehand, or it wouldn't have happened. That was in 1964. And like I said about the wages and inflation, I think I was employed at $700 a month.
My God!
Living it up.
Not terribly surprising sentiment, but
Wait a minute, I only got 620. I only got 620 a year later.
oops. So, as Les pointed out, that was in a different group. I was hired as the administrative manager for the Corvallis office, and shortly became the administrative manager for the firm as a whole at the same time. At that time, we employed approximately 110 people in 4 offices. That was in '64.
Okay, back to Sid, I guess. You know what, I forget what all the questions were. Mentors, yes. Talk about who mentored you in the firm and how that all worked. And obviously, oh, good, thank you, Les.
I thought I had him trained, but he's no better than he was when he left.
Hey, you were my mentor, so watch it.
My mentor was Archie Rice. Some of you remember Archie Rice. Archie Rice had 2 personalities, one at work and one at play. And the one at play was a lot of fun. The one at work wasn't. He really challenged me. There were just the 2 of us. He was water and I was wastewater. And we were doing a lot of small projects, very busy and the like. And he was a tough taskmaster at work and a fun guy away from work. And I have to tell you a story. It involves Bill Waters and Archie. I don't know how that combination, but I'll weave them together here in a minute. In January of 1953, Bill Waters was working for the firm, and I was there, and apparently I was available because Bill and I were asked to go down to Coquille, Oregon, down to near the coast on the Coquille River to replace an impeller in a pump that we'd put in on the Coquille River. Now, January in Coquille is not a good time of year. That week was foggy and cold. And we had no tools, and there was no real provision to pull that pump out of the water. So we had to build an A-frame and cut out some of the piling and posts and the like. It was a terrible job. Took all week. Finally got the job done. And I was sitting in the, Bill and I got done late, I think it was Saturday night. So we said, we're not going to drive back to Corvallis. It's about a 4 or 5 hour drive. We'll just lay over at the Coquille Hotel and have a nice dinner and go back in the morning. So we were in the bar about 2 o'clock in the morning, Saturday night. And there was a artificial insemination convention. We were arguing in favor of the bull. And I got a phone call now. And they had to come out and tell me I had a phone call because we didn't have things you carried around. And it was my mother. I don't know how she knew where I was. And told me that I just had my birth of my oldest son in Corvallis. And that Archie Rice had taken my wife, first wife, Rosemary, or Pat as she was called, to the hospital for the birth of my oldest son in January of 1953. So that's the way I tied those two together.
I don't know where to start. No. I know that when we were in Corvallis, Sid would come down every month or two, but just to kind of bolster us up because it's a bad time. But Pat would come down, and Pat would help Myrna do the laundry and get our washing machine worked. And so we enjoyed them coming down anytime. They brought some food too for us. I forgot to say in Cannon Beach that I actually worked on job number 2, which is the Cannon Beach Water Authority for Fred Merrifield, charge time to job number 2. Which I think is kind of I don't know what 1, 2, or 3, or 4, what they were. Mentors, was that it?
Yeah.
Okay, mentors. I really had 2. This guy forever, but Ralph Roderick was a true mentor. Actually, everybody in the Corvallis office, from Jim Howland down to Bud Smith, who was the janitor, and Jim's attitude, they were all my mentors. I listened to all of them. But Ralph Roderick, Sue Roderick Fisher, Sue, he was Ralph's son, daughter. Sorry, it's tough being up here. Ralph is the one that Sid taught me how to work with clients, contractors, and such. But Ralph taught me how to make cold calls. And he would knock on doors. Everybody was his friend.
Yeah.
And we sold every city we could find in southern Oregon, including the Bear Creek Sanitary Authority, who Hank Patchen was going to be here tonight. Sorry he's not here, but Hank's father was the commissioner of Jackson County at that time. Was instrumental on Bear Creek Sanitary Authority. And he led me, and when prickly filters went out of fashion, I found I could survive with CH2M in selling work and figuring out killing the dinosaur, drag it back to Sid, he would get it done, and we'd go away happy, sometimes with a bone to see.
One thing I forgot to mention in that time frame when I started with the company, for those of you that like to keep numbers, our revenue for the year 1964 was $1.8 million. And the decimal has moved over, I think, about 3 or 4 places since then. I'm proud to say my mentor was clearly Jim Howland. I worked with and for Jim for a number of years. In fact, I could even argue that I never got a promotion for the first 20 years that I worked, because I worked for Jim in one capacity or another all that time. Terrific guy. As any of you that know him remember, the most selfless person I've ever known. Didn't have his own office. It was the office he sat in. Didn't have a car, it was the car that he drove. never had a parking space, didn't believe in them. Just a terrific guy. And I believe I wrote in, I think about 1965 or 66, I was a student of management theories, that Jim Howland invented theory Z of management principles before anybody knew the words. Terrific guy.
Okay, talk about, what would, I can't read this one without saying it the short way. What was your biggest screw up? Or putting it the way the question was phrased, is there anything that occurred during your tenure in the firm that you would like to have done differently? I don't know if he writes this stuff.
I saw that question and I pondered over it because there were many opportunities to do things differently. But only one stands out that has any meaning, and it really didn't have anything to do with my actions. I was down in Roseburg. You had to drive down to Roseburg, 125, 30 miles south of Corvallis. And I went down there to look at a sewer installation project, and it was in solid rock. They had to blast all the way through there. And I was down there. I had a council meeting at Springfield, which was about halfway back, just opposite Eugene. And so I went down to Roseburg in the morning and was standing there alongside the ditch. They just blasted a portion of the trench, and the backhoe was digging the ditch out. And I was standing, looking, watching the backhoe dig out the trench. And the contractor had his back to the trench and was talking to him. And apparently there was an unexploded stick or two of dynamite in there, and it blew. And it blew my glasses all off and rock all over my face and the like and the like. Didn't really hurt the contractor at all. That's the way contractors are. So they took me to the hospital and picked all the rock, or thought they picked all the rock out, and patched me up, and I had one lens so I could drive. The other lens they took out. So there I was, patches all over, and broken glasses, and went to the council meeting. I pulled ahead. I said, so what do you guys got there? I've had a little accident. I'd appreciate it if you'd get me on early. They said, oh, no problem. Except we have a public meeting right ahead of the, oh, God. I went there, and they managed to work me in at 12:15 that night. Now, the only thing I wish I hadn't done is not been facing the trench. It blew. And I still have the rock still works out. I have a big one there. I use that kind of as a battle scar. And a bunch of them around here, but most of them they picked out. But that was just one of the prizes of missing one of your child's birthdays and getting blown up with his other things you don't write down in the remembrance thing. No, it was in Roseburg.
When they saw that question, I said, there's nothing CH2M, I really weren't changed, but I'd forgotten that part. But I got to tell you, Sid would never stay overnight anywhere. If it was 4 o'clock in the morning, he'd still drive to Corvallis. And I can remember one time when he didn't quite make the turnoff in Corvallis and ended up in grass off the side of the road. But even from Cannon Beach, when it took 5 hours to drive from Cannon Beach to Corvallis at that time, Sid would always go back at that night because he had to be there for Jim Howland's watch to tell him he was on time. we in Corvallis office, you had to go through this one door, and Jim Howland put this clock up there to make sure that you got there on time. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock, absolutely.
Jim had a starting time, but he never mentioned a quitting time.
And by the way, I hardly ever saw you there at starting time.
Okay, waiting time, he was there with us, all of
I
us.
had to wait for the disabled parking space to clear.
But one of the things in the old Corvallis office, when I started as a structural engineer, the first job I had, I didn't have a desk, and I was in the middle of the hallway, at the end of the hall. And I was working on the structural for the expansion of the Corvallis office building. And that's where I put 20 nails in a 2x4. Harry Teal fired me right there. Things I do over, Sid reminded me of one that still scares me. We were doing the Salem treatment plant, and I was doing some inspection on the 72-inch sewer. This is as tall as I am, plus a little bit more. And we were doing joint testing, and someone got the idea that we ought to confirm that by filling this pipeline that was 3 miles long with water and see how much leaks out of it. And they built a double concrete block plug in the 72-inch pipe that was 30 feet in the ground, and it was leaking. And so they set up a little collection to see how much it would leak, but we had to measure it. And Sid said, we better go down, check out the measurement, because we can't trust the contractor. So here I'm down with this little bucket, and I've got gallons of water behind me. If it breaks, I'm dead. And Sid said we did a good job.
Let's mention me driving off the road. We used to have work way down in southern Oregon, in Ashland and the like, and it was freeway. But it was about 3 hours drive if you drove about 80 miles an hour. And so I'd left Ashland.
Use the mic.
I left Ashland after the council meeting or whatever, you know, 10 o'clock at night or something, and was pounding home. And tired, and it was good weather and the like. And there was a sign that says Corvallis next exit. So hell, I turned right then, about a mile from the exit. Now you have to remember, these freeways are about a 3-to-1 slope. And you can imagine the thoughts as I went down that slope. I said, oh God, if anybody sees this, how am I going to explain it? So I said, the thing I got to do is I got to gun it and get out of here. So I went down that slope, turned, and came back up, and was backwards. Fortunately, there wasn't any traffic. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, you know. And then I started to laugh because, you know, strange things could have happened there. I'd like to have seen a picture of that if someone had had a photo of it. So that was the story.
There's another part of it. Jim Holland insisted all firm cars be white,
Yeah.
with the logo on them, because if we're going to drive wild, then we'll be more conservative, because we've got the name of the firm on the side of the car, and it's a white car. So Sid driving off the road was not, according to Jim Holland's policies,
No, he was a front
result.
Sid did mention Jim Holland was very punctually minded, and one of the first jobs that I had as an administrative manager was to go out and buy a group of clocks, you know, pocket watches sort of thing, right, that I could put on the glass door, just on the inside of the glass doors of every entrance to the building on Western Avenue. So that those who were late could see how late they were. Anyway, in terms of goose, right? A fairly early job that I had in the administrative field was that we had purchased some property across the street on Western Avenue that contained a series of old, tired houses. And I was in charge of managing those. And my screw up was that I hired, actually, been hired before me, but I continued the management of those 4 or 5 houses with a woman who really didn't know what she was doing. So if I'd been smart, I'd have hired professional help. Well, the truth be known, she knew more about what she was doing than I did, because she ended up absconding with $1,000 or so.
Thanks, guys. Great job.